Blacks in Technology.
Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology.
Welcome, everyone, to the 61st episode of the Blacks in Technology Big Tech Talk podcast. I am your host tonight, along with my host, Ayori. I didn't even give my name. How about that? Just started right into it, forgot my name. Greg Greenlee, along with Ayori Selassie as the co-host. And we have a pretty special show tonight. We're going to be talking about DevOps. And we're going to get into that with our guest. But first, I'm going to go through a little bit of housekeeping. What's going on over there, Ayori? How you doing?
All sorts of stuff.
All sorts of stuff?
Yeah. We got a podcast going on. What's going on with you over there, Greg?
Not a whole lot. Just doing this podcast. I'm feeling good. Should be pretty good. Yeah. So let me go through a little bit of housekeeping, just get a few announcements out the way before we actually jump into our questions and introduce our guests. So it was Blacks in Technology. If you're listening to us for the first time, you can check us out at blacksintechnology.net. We're also on the Twitters at Black in Technology. That's BLKINTECHNOLOGY. You can check us out on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Blacks in Technology. And there's also a LinkedIn group for Blacks in Technology. So just do a search on Blacks in Technology and you find our LinkedIn group there as well. And if you're listening to this podcast right now, of course you got to be listening to it. But if you want to tweet us some questions for our guests, you can tweet them to Big Tech Talk. That's the hashtag to use. That's BITTECHTALK. Okay, so what is Blacks in Technology? We're a tech-focused community and media organization focused on increasing diversity in technology. Blacks in Technology's mission is to increase visibility, participation, and change the perception of people of African descent in technology through community-focused activities, events, and media. Blacks in Technology is stopping the divide by establishing a blueprint of world-class technical excellence and innovation by providing resources, guidance, and issuing a challenge to our members to surpass the high mark and establish new standards of global innovation via mind sharing and collaboration efforts. So Blacks in Technology, we're always on the lookout and to form new partnerships and opportunities to assist our members with their continued professional growth and development. So if you want to partner with us, send us an email to partnerships@blacksintechnology.net. If you have any general inquiries, you can send us an email to info@blacksintechnology.net. And also, if you'd like to be a sponsor of the Big Tech Talk podcast and get your product or company name in front of our wide network, email us at sponsorship@blacksintechnology.net. Now on to announcements, big announcements. So, jobs board. We did implement a jobs board recently, and that is up. We've got jobs posted on there. We'll be getting more jobs posted pretty soon. So visit that on our homepage. There's a jobs link at the top, so just click on that to see who's hiring right now. FaucetCon is going on right now in Orlando, Florida. I think today was the first day. Yeah, it's the 11th. Today is the first day. It's going down in Orlando, Florida. FaucetCon is a free and open source software conference being put on by a fellow BIT member, Brian Smith. So shout out to Brian for organizing or being one of the co-organizers of the FaucetCon event. PuppetConf is actually going to be going on. When is that? The 20th. Through the 24th in San Francisco, California, and we actually have about, yes, it is. We actually have about 8 members of Blacks in Technology attending that conference, including yours truly, and Ayori is going to be there as well. It's going to be a kick-ass time. We're going to have fun. We're going to take lots of pictures, mingle a lot, learn a lot. Should be fun. It's a 5-day event. First 3 days is training. Last 2 days are keynotes, talks, demos, and certification testing. And what else is coming up? Strange Loop.
So we got so much stuff coming up. We got Strange Loop in St. Louis. So all my Midwest people who are going to be passing through the gateway to the West on September 17th, 18th, and 19th to hang out with our folks down there talking about emerging languages. We're going to be talking about Erlang. Last year we had an awesome keynote by the creator of Scala. It's going to be great. So we'll be possibly even doing a live podcast from St. Louis, and sharing about that. And then also we've got DevOps Day coming in Chicago in October 7th to 8th. So there are going to be some awesome talks. They're going to be doing some Ignite sessions. And, we want to give a shout-out to Jerry Cattell, tell us about Jerry Cattell, Greg.
Jerry, I actually met Jerry through the Twitterverse. So Jerry, I think he was responding to a tweet about a call for papers that Elizabeth Nairmore, she's big in the PHP community, especially here in Cincinnati. I think she used to work for Engine Yard. Sent out a tweet. Jerry responded. I responded to Jerry, and me and Jerry began a dialogue. And I was like, hey, I'm been really looking at, DevOps and following the movement and everything like that. And I want people within our community to know about DevOps and learn about DevOps. And I want to, want Life Technology to be a media sponsor. So we worked that out. We actually have a code for people who want to attend DevOps Day Chicago. It's going to be going on October 7th and 8th at Willis Tower. And if you want to sign up and get 20% off, use the code BIT-DevOps. So that's BIT-DEVOPS for 20% off admission there. So shout out to Jerry. We've had a lot of conversation over the past, week, 2 weeks. And he actually, with his help, has helped us to engineer this podcast that we're having today. He reached out to his network and got a couple of guys to talk about DevOps. So that's what we're here for tonight. What else? Real quick. Next week is going to be our end of summer splash, our end of summer podcast. It's going to be live from Strange Loop. We hope to be bringing you that next Thursday. Same bit time, same bit channel. That's pretty good. Same bit time, bit channel. Anybody who knows the reference to the old school Batman, that's where that's coming from. Anyhow, conferences, we're going to be talking about upcoming conferences. We're going to be talking about our jobs board. We're going to be talking about things that's going to be happening for our upcoming year. It's going to be a big show. So tune in next week, same time, same channel. So now let's jump into this into our guests because I'm happy to have these guys here, and they took time out of their night to join us here and talk DevOps. So I want to introduce our guests, Matt Stratton and Michael Lanyon. Welcome, guys, to the show.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
So real quick, I want to give our audience your background, your bios. Matt Stratton is a solutions architect at Chef, where he demonstrates how Chef's automation platform provides speed and flexibility to clients' infrastructure. He's also the co-host of the Arrested DevOps podcast, so go check that out. I have it actually in my Podkicker subscription list. It's the Arrested DevOps podcast, and he's devoted to concepts like continuous delivery and infrastructure as code. If you don't know what that is, you're going to know by the end of this podcast. And his license plate actually says DevOps, so this guy is devoted to DevOps. And we have Michael Lanyon as well. He's the VP of Engineering for Critical Mass. It's a digital advertising agency. His days involve a mix of responsibilities, including pitching new business, mentoring, driving architectural decisions, and contributing to software. Michael is passionate about the cultural ramifications of DevOps and has been pursuing a change at Critical Mass for the past 2 years. He lives in Chicago with his wife and 2 cats, and is a former competitive cyclist and enjoys long bike rides on the weekend. So welcome, guys. Definitely appreciate you guys joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Sure.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, we've talked before. It's funny when there's been conversations about the phrase or the word DevOps and about if we need to change the word to mean something different. And I continue to say we cannot change it because I'm not getting new plates, man. So, we as an industry have to stick with it just for that reason alone.
That's excellent. So our first question to mostly all of our guests who come on the show is give us your background in tech. And I'll start with Matt, and then Matt, after we finish, then Michael can go after that.
Okay, so I mean, we'll kind of skip around a little bit, but I mean, like a lot of people, I guess, I mean, started out in elementary school, kind of played on with the good old Apple II, playing lemonade stand, Oregon Trail, and right now they used to have little programs in the Sunday funnies that, you know, basic programs you go type in and run, and so playing with that kind of stuff. And fast forward a little bit to I went to school originally for theater and switched to computer science because I decided I wanted to actually get a job. And you know, spent most of my early career, I was doing a lot of like Apple service, a lot of field service stuff, and kind of backed into Microsoft technology, not on purpose. Did a lot of system integration stuff on the Windows back office side, worked for a bunch of ISPs, did, you know, work for various financial companies. I'm in Chicago, so there's an awful lot of finance, awful lot of insurance, bopped around for there, and then after about 10 or 15 years of that nonsense, went and worked for a company called Apartments.com, so went and ran infrastructure over there. I said, you'll never get me back into big finance again. And that was where I started to really learn about DevOps. We were doing DevOps, didn't know it was called that. There's certain principles, and we'll talk a little bit later about what those principles are. Kind of looking back, I'm like, oh, we kind of were doing that, but we just called it work. And since that's where I started to really learn about infrastructure as code and continuous delivery, and started implementing the stuff there. And from there, worked at a consultancy in Chicago, working on the Azure platform, doing our infrastructure automation practice there. We're a Chef partner, and an opportunity came to go work at Chef itself. And I'm a huge fan of the product. Configuration management changed my life. Went home to the mothership. So that's kind of the very quick and compressed history, OMAT, and technology.
Nice.
That's awesome, Matt. You know, I think the next ink could possibly configuration management change my life themed.
That'd be a good set too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to commit to, you know, DevOps for life, like the license plate necessarily. Yeah. So, you know, I didn't really get into computers too much until college. I've always kind of been a person who's deeply interested and passionate about one thing at a time. And in high school, that was music. I played in a band, you know, had long hair and all that good stuff. And in college, I got into cycling. But at the same time, college is where I was first kind of like introduced to programming, introduced to computers. I went to college to be an electrical engineer. And when we got into those courses where, you know, you're thinking about electromagnetics and the way those magnetic interferences will kind of affect the electronics on different layers of a multi-layer PCB, it just kind of, my mind wandered, kind of like it did on the bike. After I'd gotten out of cycling, you know, I really came home to technology, and I've been focused on tech ever since. Just kind of happened to be, I was in Ohio, kind of close to Cincinnati, doing a week-long stage race, and got this job posting forwarded to me for Critical Mass, which, you know, they were doing some really interesting work with some really interesting clients. I'd never really thought about advertising before. I mean, I thought of myself as a cyclist and a technologist. But, you know, it's hard to go from such an unstructured kind of, you know, I look back at it as a carefree life, as a cyclist, to go into kind of like a corporate structure. And it turned out advertising wasn't really a corporate structure at all. And Critical Mass has been my home and workplace, or my workplace and extended home for the past many years. I was hired on as an application developer, kind of had deep chops in Java, and I've worked on various clients, whether it be kind of Convention and Visitors Bureau. The Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Bureau was one of my first clients, and worked on several different verticals, kind of bouncing between more software contributions to more team leadership. Kind of got into some of the configuration management and infrastructure stuff when we worked on some full stack projects with clients that actually own some of their, or had responsibility for their managed hosting, and also onto kind of more advertising focused clients where it was really about kind of thinking about how the technology or whatever Critical Mass as a company could do to support their business objectives, and have over the past several years kind of wound my way into VP of Engineering, which is essentially a recognition that as Adam of OpsCo or of Chef would say, is the software is eating the world. We've kind of recognized that every technology at its core needs to become a technology company, and we are helping facilitate that transition through some of their marketing platforms. And my role is to kind of support that and to grow and strengthen the team, and also have some fun coding on the side as well.
Nice.
That's awesome. I really like that, what is your core business, and, how does that align with the technology, and, how are you building that out to scale? I think, this conversation of DevOps and these principles are really core to being able to make that happen in a variety of different ways. So I want to ask you sort of a follow-up question is, what is your definition of DevOps? And if we can start off with Matt.
Okay, so to me, DevOps.
You have DevOps on your license plate.
It is on my plate, right? So I've been explaining this a lot, and it's not as easy as it should be. But the DevOps itself, so it's a portmanteau, and I'm real proud that I pronounced that right the first time. It's basically shoving the words development and operations together. But I think an important thing about that is that it's development plus operations. It's not like operations development. That's an important piece. And so at a shortcut, a lot of times we think about DevOps, it's sort of like the dev and the ops hugging, right? Like, and you can't do a DevOps talk without putting up that GIF with a little girl with the big fire behind her that says, work fine in DevOps is problem now. So that's like the shortcut to a lot of this. But we kind of like a little bit of the history. Like, so the term, so a dude named Patrick Dubois came up with this term in 2009, and he saw it because he was working, and it came out of Agile, right? So it was this, Patrick saw this idea and saying, sysadmins, needed to work closer with dev because, and I've realized this, or had this pain myself being, running operations in a company that was going through an Agile transformation. And when you're looking and you're doing these fast cycles of Agile and these short loops and these sprints and everything's moving really quickly, traditional technology operations, it's really, really challenging to keep up with that. And so that was the thing that Patrick saw. And his idea was to include the principles of Agile development into system administration. And in fact, actually the original, for lack of a better term, the original name of DevOps was Agile System Administration. And as Patrick would tell you, they renamed it DevOps because Agile System Administration was too long for a conference name. At the same time that Patrick was having this, kind of stuff happening at Velocity in 2009, John Allspaw and Paul Hammond from Flickr gave a talk called 10 Deploys a Day at Flickr. It was a talk about how Flickr was able to deploy software 10 plus times a day, which blew everybody's mind that they could do it. And the gist was it was about development and operation cooperation. And it's a great talk, and it distills down a lot of the fundamental concepts, which are, at the end of the day, the folks writing the code and the folks who are keeping the lights on, we all want the same thing. We thought that we don't. And a lot of times there's this belief that, hey, development is beholden to features and moving fast, and ops job is stability. And the reality is we all want our business to succeed. And the sooner that we realize that we're all the business, there is no the business, we are all the business, we all want the same things, and how we can work together in a cross-functional way, that's the core of DevOps right there. And it really should be called DevSec, DBA, QA, BizOps, right? It's everybody. It's not just dev. It's not just tech ops, right? It's not just coders and sysadmins. It's kind of looking at this cross-functional piece. Another piece that I think, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you know what I really like about it? I mean, what makes the word DevOps sing to my heart is that, so back in the day I worked as a system administrator, so I've done everything from, Linux administration to, just keeping the systems imaged, and all that kind of stuff, all the way down to engineering and development. And there was always this sort of perception that, those DBA guys and or gals and, those sysadmin server management people, they're not development. And I think we absolutely are. we are absolutely a part of this entire machine working and making engineering magic. And so by saying, hey, DevOps, we are working together. We are, really one and the same, and there is definitely a relationship, and that needs to be recognized and celebrated. I think it really just creates that sort of unifying force there, where you don't have that same kind of like class, tier, who does what, who does this, and who's more important thing going on.
Absolutely. I mean, there's this idea that, when you don't have this concept, it's like your sysadmins are janitors for your servers. That's the perception, right? And that's also how...
That's some BS. I'm just going to say it.
Exactly, right? Because it's all piece of it, and that's where you're not successful, because everybody is you're celebrating everything that people contribute. Just because you're not necessarily writing some code that's moving a story along, these things don't happen, without that collaboration. So it's a very collaborative thing. It's not about tooling. You can't do it without some tooling, but and that's what makes DevOps hard, right? It's squishy, it's people, it's all that hard stuff, that hard to define thing. And I like to say, tools are easy and people are hard. So we always want the tool, and that's what came out of everybody misunderstood the Flickr talk, and what they got out of it was, well, how do you deploy 10 times a day? What's the script? What's the button? How do you do that? And like, you're missing the point. We can do it because there's trust. We can do it because there's communication. It's not about how we automated the release. And now the thing is, your choice of tools can absolutely be a factor. So if you're familiar with this concept of Conway's Law, which is that the culture of an organization influences the architecture of its software, the same thing can happen in an inverse way with tooling. And or your choice of tooling can be reflected by your culture. And Nathan Harvey has said that you can't. He said once you can't say I trust all my people and then use centralized version control. That's a very opinionated statement, but choosing centralized version control reflects an opinion that you as an organization have about your development group, which is I can't trust you. We have to have this single source of truth. And so our choice of tools reflects our culture.
It's a funny story, Matt. Maybe it's even 4 years ago now, I was part of an effort where a peer and I were tasked with kind of ingesting this enormous piece of business, the size of which the company had never seen before. And we put in place a lot of standardization and automation that we'd never really had to deal with before. And there was distrust essentially between, some of our newer developers, and I consider myself a dev. I've never really held a candle to any true sysadmin in understanding how, the Linux kernel or networking works, but between the development team and the ops team. And we write a lot of Java. We use some Maven, and one of the guys wrote a Maven mojo that essentially wrapped rsync so that the ops team couldn't see what rsync commands were being passed or what switches and whatnot. So they couldn't muck with it. And it was essentially, they turned rsync, one of the kind of most colloquial commands you would use to transfer files between machines, into this kind of black box that drove a wall of confusion even deeper, taller, wider. And that's absolutely, I know, right? It was amazing how kind of detrimental it was to this idea of collaboration. And there's an acronym that was put out into the wild by John Willis and Damon Edwards of the DevOps Cafe podcast called CAMS. And I think they use CAMS mostly because it rolls off the tongue easily. I don't think any one of the letters is more important than another letter. It stands for culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. And you really need all of those things to be able to kind of have this cultural shift that is DevOps.
I think this, I think what you guys are talking about as far as culture is definitely what hits home with me, because when I talk about culture and I bring this up to some of the higher ups in the company I work for, I like to kind of explain it using a farmer's using a farmer as a metaphor, and I like to say, farming to a farmer, that's their culture, right? That's what they do. Every day in and day out, they go out and farm. And they use the tools that they have in order to get that job done. And I like to say this because, some people will think that if you put the tools in place, then that's going to actually bring along the culture. And I like to say, no, the tools don't actually create culture. And I like the phrase that you mentioned, tools reflect culture. And so I like to say, if a farmer wants to till his land, or whatever, he's going to till the land regardless on what type of tool he has. Now, the tool might make it easier for him to do it, but it definitely doesn't. That's not what determines whether or not he's going to. The fact that he's a farmer, the fact that that's his culture, the fact that he gets up every day at 5 a.m. or whatever and goes out and does this same thing continually every day is what makes him, a farmer. And you have to have that type of culture in place before you can get to that point to where these tools are even going to matter.
No, and I really like that. But the other piece of that is, so when that farmer decides he wants to be a banker and goes and he brings his, backhoe or his combine with him to go count some money, it's not going to work so well. He's going to have to come up with another. He's going to have to use another tool. So the corollary of that too is that when I make my cultural change, I do have to change the tools that I'm using in order to do it. But I'm going to become a banker just because I throw away my combine. Now I take, this metaphor is going to die because I think of a tool that a banker would use.
Excel.
My Excel, right? My field, and suddenly say, now I'm going to be a banker. So, I like that. I like that analogy really well. I'm going to steal that.
It's not
Feel
stealing.
free.
It's not stealing. It's all open source, right?
Exactly. So, we're talking about that. We're talking about culture, and we're talking about that it's this cultural shift, it's a position or something that you do, but yet it's not a thing that you do. Because I've listened to a lot of DevOps podcasts, and I've kind of followed DevOps, and people who are in the DevOps movement, in the DevOps culture, hate saying you're doing DevOps or, you're a DevOps engineer. So it's more of a cultural shift than it is a position. So why do you think that DevOps, and I've received emails from recruiters all the time recruiting for DevOps engineers. So why do you think it's become this buzzword?
I think you nailed it because it's a buzzword, right? It's that this is going to be the thing, right? I'm the CIO. I read in the Insight magazine that DevOps is a thing, so I'm going to go to my team and say, well, we got to do the DevOps. And so what you do is you just rebrand your release management team as your DevOps team if you have one, or more likely than what happens is, I can tell you this in Chicago, right? We're no longer hiring sysadmins. If you want to be a sysadmin, too bad. We have no jobs. We got a lot of DevOps engineers. And it's the exact same job, right? I mean, it's a sysadmin job rec that's been branded a DevOps engineer. And the problem, so here's the problems with that. Number one is, Greg, like you said, it's not a thing that you do, right? It's not, and the problem is, like, sometimes organizations will say, well, I'm going to create a DevOps team. And now you're like, great, because we hate silos. DevOps says we shouldn't have silos, so I know, let's create another one. But is that what you're doing is you're also thinking, well, it's the new sexy, right? So DevOps is hot. So I'm going to say we're not hiring sysadmins, we're hiring DevOps engineers. So people that want to do the cool stuff will want to come work for us. But the problem is they don't want that job because they're going to see that the job is to perform backups on your Windows 2003 file server, and that ain't no DevOps, man. So it's counterproductive. The corollary is, if you want to call yourself a DevOps engineer and you're getting good work done, then go for it. I mean, there's a woman who's actually going to be speaking at DevOps Day Chicago, Randy Harper, who works for Kixeye, and her title at Kixeye is DevOps engineer, and she owns it. And you know what? I don't have a single problem with it because, maybe you'd say, oh, she's a full stack engineer or an SRE or whatever you want to call it, but her way of approaching it is my job is it's hardcore sysadmin, but I'm embedded with our development teams. I work with those teams, and we help bring about the stability of the system that we need to have. And it's like, then you know what? Go on with your bad self and call yourself a DevOps engineer.
Yeah, it's coming from advertising. I feel like I have a little bit more compassion for what it takes to like really kind of signal what it is you intend to have in such a short amount of space. I mean, DevOps in 6 letters, it's signaling so much. It's often misused, right? But, you know, the same way full stack engineer, especially, you know, myself being a computer engineer and really understanding a lot of the really, really low level pieces of that stack, I don't believe there's any true full stack engineer. I mean, from like process architecture all the way up to like front end performance, you know, I don't think you can be an expert of that entire thing, maybe just a generalist and understand how all the pieces fit together. When you post a job title that says DevOps engineer, I mean, if you said systems programmer, maybe you're touching on that kind of. If you said, I don't know, there's other titles that kind of get close to what DevOps engineer and what someone like Randy contributes to her organization. But it's difficult if you don't use the word that kind of is emblematic of the community you're trying to recruit from.
Yeah, I think just to throw my little 2 cents in there, not being from DevOps, but the way that I think of it just from a social standpoint is the same way that I think about when someone says they're a software engineer or they're a developer versus a quality engineer. You know, socially we have developed a response to job titles. And when someone says, hi, you know, I'm a system administrator, that system administrator might be and may have been developing scripts and building automation, you know, for a very long time. They may be doing some very complex things, but people have a very bare bones knowledge of what system administration means. And so it's gotten I don't know the right word, but it's been downplayed. The contributions have been downplayed. And so, you know, what I'm seeing a lot here in the Valley is that more and more when we hire engineers, we treat our engineers and our quality engineers as one and the same. You know, if you're doing tests, that might be your primary work, but you're still an engineer at the end of the day, and you'll still build and you'll still test. And if you're a developer, you'll still build and you'll still test. It's not like, you know, quality is, you know, the stepchild to development anymore. And I think that that's sort of why this word DevOps came about, because we kind of had to take a step back and reimagine how we think about these roles so that we can really give them their just due respect. And that's how I feel about it.
I completely agree. When you look at how one of the implications of a DevOps culture shift is to have the concerns of the business as a whole be partially your own concerns, you come to understand that like quality being inherent to the process of development is one of those concerns, to release a quality product. And one of the kind of seminal texts informing the DevOps movement has been the Phoenix Project, and before that it was inspired by Elliot Goldratt's The Goal. Both of these are somewhat fictitious stories based on automotive parts manufacturers, but one of the revelations that occurs in each one of the stories is how integrating quality assurance and security in the IT story, in the Phoenix Project, and all of the other kind of, you know, the project management and help me out, Matt. There's all these. I mean, one of the ones that you missed earlier when you were going through all the different titles that you could kind of lump into DevOps, even having HR, so to speak, on the team, is really important in kind of coming together collaboratively to meet that business objective.
If you've just joined us, you're listening to Bit Tech Talk, and we're talking about DevOps with Matt Stratton, who's a solution engineer at Chef, and Michael Lanyon, who's the VP of Engineering at Critical Mass. So I want to go ahead and start moving into the next round of questions here. This has been great so far, and I know our listeners are really appreciating this topic. So we've talked about sort of the buzzwords. We've talked about the definition of DevOps. But what are some of the common issues that you guys have had to deal with when you're trying to bring these DevOps principles into the various companies that you've worked for?
So one of the things that I would say that can be an issue.
There's a little bit of echo back there.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. I'll sit a little closer to my mic.
That's better.
When I think poetic. So, is that like Agile? Like actually, a lot of if you've gone through Agile transformations, the DevOps transformation can be very similar. They're both things that are really challenging to do as a grassroots piece. You kind of have to go in both directions, right? You need to have some buy-in from the top to get some support, but your practitioners have to really buy into it as well. And that's super challenging because if you have a thing where, let's say, the CIO goes, as my example is always, he reads about it in the In-Flight magazine. I don't know what In-Flight magazine is talking about DevOps, by the way, but apparently there's some in my mind. And he comes down and says, we have to do the DevOps. And if you have this culture of mistrust, as you probably do in an organization, your practitioners are going to go, oh, here's some more crap, right? And they don't buy into it. And then likewise, if you try to bubble it up fully grassroots, you hit a lot of walls. So it's one of the big challenges is being able to show the value and get the trust to be able to pilot it. So that's one potential issue that I've encountered with customers who are trying to make this transformation.
One of
the other one is fear. I think there's a lot of fear of making mistakes, and there's something very comfortable with being able to point a finger, or very comfortable with being able to say, well, I did my part, so Dev screwed it up. You have a lot of safety in that, and breaking down and enabling trust is really hard.
Yeah, that was essentially what I was going to say. The buzzword I've been using recently to describe that is essentially the corporate antibodies. There's going to be someone in the security group, or someone in the QA group, in the dev group, in the ops group, in the HR group, in whatever group that's going to say that we can't move that fast, or that I need to have I need to have essentially a cutoff date where I'm delivered an artifact and I need to take it away and do my processing. And then once I'm done, it can move on to the next phase of the process. And when you have a kind of entrenched interest actors in your organization who are really comfortable with the way things are, it can really be a barrier to seeing through some of the change that needs to happen to really act collaboratively, have that true and open sharing, and see that culture change through.
I want to kind of piggyback a question, or piggyback off of that. When I hear about DevOps and different organizations and companies implementing the DevOps culture within it's usually these large web scale companies that are doing it. You hear about the Twitter, the Etsy's, places like that. So is there let me say how to phrase this. Is there a company where, or is there any any situation, within a company where DevOps is not the way to kind of go, hey, this is not going to be good for this company. Have you guys ever experienced anything like that, or do you know of any instances? Or what would be like the prototypical company where DevOps would be, or you would say, hey, DevOps is definitely for you. You should be practicing it.
Well, actually, I would say the funny thing, and this is where, Michael referenced Damon Edwards from DevOps Cafe, and he's been the one who has said before that actually big enterprise is who needs DevOps. They're the ones who need it the most, because your startups, you don't need DevOps because you're already doing it, because you have a dev and an ops and it's one person, right? Or you do it because that's the only way that work can occur. So it's actually really the enterprise that will benefit from this transformation the most. And there are great examples of that happening. It's happened at General Electric, at GE. Justin Arbuckle gave a great talk at ChefConf this year about, hunting the DevOps whale, it was called, and he talks about kind of their journey in his particular pocket of GE and how they were able to start to affect this change. Target has implemented this in the DevOps Days Minneapolis. They gave a great talk about the journey that Target has gone on to go down the DevOps route. And so the thing is, and then you go talk to some of these web scale companies, you go talk to Etsy and you say, do you guys do DevOps? And they say, we don't use the word DevOps. We just call it work. like if the word DevOps comes up in the Etsy office, they're probably making fun of it. Is kind of what they've told me. So they don't have to have these transformations. That's just how they work. To your thing about, is there a company where it wouldn't work? I think that if someone would say this doesn't work in my company, it's because excuses are easy. It's very easy to make excuses.
Yeah, I'd say it wouldn't work in any company where there's really no impetus to try. But generally speaking, I don't see why you would want to try, because if you're not trying, you're not succeeding, and you're probably going to go out of business. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't, undergo this culture change. When Matt talks about tools, and Matt is a solution architect for chefs, so this is a little bit hearsay for him. For the first couple of years, I was part of the DevOps movement and was fully aware of what was going on. We didn't really have a place for configuration management at Critical Mass. We did a lot of small one-offs that it was really difficult to kind of justify the learning curve of configuration management at that point in its evolution. I'll say that it's gotten a lot better since then. But I really wanted to write blog post after blog post about how you can have DevOps without having configuration management or without having some of the new hot monitoring tools that were coming out at the time. It's really more about, to me, those cultural kind of ramifications.
I think the other thing is when you think, and Greg, if I'm understanding the question, you're like kind of saying, is there like a vertical that would be the anti-dev? Is that good? And a lot of times, the very things that make you think it's not good for DevOps is the inverse. So like a highly regulated industry, auditors, they don't know, but they love DevOps because there's so much automation that goes into it. And as I talk, this will come up all the time when I'm talking to customers about Chef, and they're like, "Oh, well, compliance is a thing. So how can we use Chef?" But I'm like, because people will lie. Computers don't lie. If Chef says it did a thing, it really did a thing. A person, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. So it really can help. But the trick of it is involving all parts, right? If you go and try to do DevOps within your small bit and you don't involve your security group or your compliance group or your monitoring group or whatever, you don't bring them to the party with you, you're not going to be successful. And then it's going to look like, oh, this doesn't work because we have this outside group, but they're really not an outside group.
Gotcha. And I'm in the same boat as Michael when it comes to because I work for a data center / co-location / service provider here in Cincinnati, Ohio, as a sysadmin, and we do a lot of one-off projects for our clients as well. Implementing virtual infrastructure for them and things like that. And so I'm always kind of trying to search for ways like how can we implement something that would help us out in this area? How can we in certain situations it's just not, like you said with Critical Mass, it's just not as feasible at this moment to actually go about implementing that type of automation or that type of culture or whatever at our company. So I definitely understand the pain points when it comes to that.
Yeah, while we didn't undertake tooling like configuration management, we did look at the pieces of our process that we do routinely, and often deploy, sometimes several times a day if the client requests are rolling in. And so we went deep into deploy automation and did everything we could to make sure that process was absolutely repeatable, whether it was a planned deployment or an unplanned deployment. And the reliability and stability, kind of the reproducibility we got from that effort was well worth it.
What matters is it's not like, well, you must use config management or you must use automated testing or whatever. What you do, and this goes back to Eliot Goldratt and the theory of constraints, which is when you look at your value stream, you look at if it's a manufacturing, how do parts move through my assembly line? If it's code, how do I move from a project manager or product owner's idea to it's in front of a customer. Through that whole value stream, you say, what's my biggest constraint? What's my bottleneck? And the idea in theory of constraints is that any improvement made other than at the bottleneck is a waste of time. So if your bottleneck, Greg, is like, hey, I spend way too much, like when we're trying to deploy a system for a customer, everything's getting queued up because Joe over there is the only one who knows how to install MySQL and he has to do it by hand, then the only thing you should be doing is making that process faster because it's a bottleneck. But if it's not a bottleneck, then don't bother automating installing MySQL. Find your real bottleneck, and that's what you go and you improve. So it sounds like in the case of critical mass, deploying the code was one of the constraints, and so you work to improve that. And it's different for everybody's a snowflake. Everybody has a different impediment in their value stream.
Yeah, I agree. I think also, just to introduce one of those agile terms, definition of done changes when you start to think in this way. So, you've created something, you've created a process, but how does that process grow? How does that process change over time as new things are introduced to it? And that's going to affect the way that you think about not just your automation, but the way that you're designing all of your systems. And I think that's why DevOps is not just about automation. DevOps is how you think about your systems, how you design your systems, how you reason about your systems, and how they work together as a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, like Michael said, I mean, it's automation is just one of the 4 things in CAMS. So there's the other 3 are just as important, but we tend to conflate DevOps and automation together because it's popular, and because, to be honest, automation is way more fun than like sharing and culture and learning about people and all that icky stuff, right? Like, it's way more fun to write a Puppet manifest than it is to, do some other stuff. So I think it's a common thing.
It's so much easier than culture change. It's just, you can put on your headphones and do automation. You cannot put on your headphones and do culture change.
Well, you can. You're just taking your culture in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I think it makes a difference, the stage, what stage your business is at as well. Because, if you're a startup and you're growing, you're going to have more abilities and opportunities to implement, this culture in your company. Whereas if you're a huge company like GE, making that kind of shift is going to be a lot more difficult because you're going to have a lot more people that are very much set in their ways and they're like, this works, why are you trying to touch it? Like, that doesn't make sense, right?
You're trying to turn a giant cruise ship instead of, right, like a little skiff, so that inertia of the giant enterprise is really massive. The good thing, though, is that when that inertia can work for you, once you get it moving, then it really becomes powerful. So it's just...
That is the key. That to me right there is the key thing, is getting it. There's a lot, and I can kind of attest to that, just, some situations that have occurred and jobs that I've had is where people don't want to touch the culture aspect of their company at all. And it's kind of hard to convince them to, hey, all you need to do is give it a little nudge. And, like you said, that inertia will begin and start moving. And then next thing you know, you're making a lot more changes within the culture. But yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Cool. So the other thing we talked about, we mentioned this a couple of times, and I want to go into a little bit of detail on this, is this concept of infrastructure as code. Like, what do you mean about that? And can you go into some detail about that concept?
Sure. It's actually a pretty simple concept, and it's one that I like because it kind of defines itself. But what it means, there's 2 pieces to infrastructure as code. One is that it is defining your infrastructure as a versioned artifact. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that it's, instead of being, I can sit there and I can say this portion of my infrastructure or this entirety of my infrastructure is versioned. I know its state. I'm describing its state the same way that I would describe something in software, in code, of something that I want, rather than being procedural and saying, here's a bunch of tasks that I do. You can think about it almost as your systems are Christopher Weber, who's a config management nerd as well, has talked about, he thinks about in infrastructure as code, all your systems are software objects and interact with each other. And I'm like, that's, wow, taking the metaphor really far. But it works. But so that's one of it, is that you think about your infrastructure as artifacts, just like DLLs, binaries, config files, XML, whatever you have it. The other piece of infrastructure as code is something about, and again, this gets a little bit onto the process side, is that it's treating your infrastructure with all the rigor and process that we've been doing with software development for years. A lot of these things are solved problems. Developers, not everyone, but as a community, are really good at testing, at versioning, at moving things through stages, and following these, doing things like code reviews. And admins and ops, we don't know what any of this means other than that they're things that our developer people do. So what we do with infrastructure as code, if we're using a tool that enables it, something like Puppet or Chef, is we are now saying, instead of writing some shell script that does its thing, I am writing actual code, but don't be scared of it, because I can tell you, if you're a sysadmin, you can code and you can debug and you do it all the time. You just don't call it that, but that's another story. And we're going to do things like test it before we deploy it. And we're going to do things like version it, and version it being more than doing .bak on a file or .timestamp on a file, like actually using source control for our configurations. And that's the first step of infrastructure as code could simply be taking your HTTP conf and putting it in version control. You don't need to use Chef. Just version config files. That's step one. And hey, man, you're doing infrastructure as code, the beginnings of it, or testing a configuration on a test machine before you actually deploy it. That's the beginnings of infrastructure as code. But it's a cultural shift. Adam Jacob, Chef, has said, you want to see cultural freakout, ask a bunch of sysadmins to do a code review before they push a change to production. We just don't think that way, and we need to, or we're going to become janitors for servers.
It's that looking at the infrastructure, that artifact that defines it as a piece of software, and applying all the rigors you would to that piece of software as you do the piece of software that serves your business, is really kind of what hooked me into it. Over the past 18 months, and certainly the tool maturity over the past 6 to 9 months of the testing for the different infrastructure as code kind of configuration management systems, is what's pulled me back into it. And the way that I kind of look at infrastructure as code, kind of a third lens maybe, is it's executable documentation that defines your infrastructure. The same way you might write down all of the steps, all the commands you wrote, into the terminal to create that server. Well, now in my manifest or in my recipe, I can now run that, and the infrastructure converges to the state as defined in source control. And the fact that every time I commit to source control, my CI tool pulls it out, runs the tests on it, and actually converges nodes, and I'm able to assert that these ports are open and these ports are not. And these services running, and if I restart the box, all of those things come right back up. It's just as beautiful, and it gives me that confidence that as a developer, I've come to expect that I can assert about the software I write. Before that, some of the sysadminry that I've seen just kind of was black magic to me almost. You ask for a server and you got a server and you didn't quite know exactly which version of the software you got on it. And having configuration management and being able to edit those files in Sublime Text, it's beautiful.
Yeah, man, I love that. I'm just thinking, all the different ways where we can take that word infrastructure and align it with all the other words that we generally relate to software development. We've got a software development lifecycle. How does infrastructure fall into that? Like, what are all the other kinds of pieces and kind of concepts that we can relate to that? Because I've been talking to some of my friends. My friends are, in the sysadmin space, and so I'm really glad to have you say that, if you keep going along this path, you're going to, become server janitors, because really, times are changing fast. We're going through the same kind of, changes that we went through in the 90s when folks were all of a sudden losing their jobs and there were new people coming in and new ways of doing things, and all of a sudden it was client server, and then all of a sudden now it's cloud in the 2000s, and now we're seeing all sorts of other things change, and as we move more and more deeper into the Internet of Things, we're going to see a lot more changes as well. And so folks really have to get on top of this and start to understand how these shifts are going to affect their work and be a part of leading those cultural changes in the companies that they're in. And I think if you're in a company where you can tell that cultural change is either impossible or is going to take too long for you to benefit from it, then you should really start looking elsewhere and start trying to find other people who are aligned to that mindset so that you can find yourself in a place where you're really going to be able to grow and be a part of the change that's happening.
I agree, and that's the thing. Like, you talked about the transformation that's happening, and like I made that comment about, like, if you don't know how to do this next level of stuff, it's not so much that you're going to be out of a job, because there's going to be plenty of companies that still want to click next admin on the Microsoft side, or people that'll just keep the lights on. Just like there's still people maintaining COBOL and mainframes out there, but no one's doing anything awesome. You're not going to. It's not going to be rewarding.
Thank you.
And so that's why I said it's not that the risk is going to be that you're going to be out of a job. The risk is that you're going to be a server janitor, and maybe that's okay. And awesome, someone's going to do it, but it ain't going to be me.
I don't know. And we're just here to tell the truth. We're not sugarcoat it. We're just going to say, hey, we've seen it happen, and we know that it's happening now, and you can choose which part you're on. Like, we're not going to be mad at you, but we don't want you to be mad at yourself. So do the thing.
A couple of months ago, the server janitor thing was something I first heard from Todd Underwood during his DevOps Days Philadelphia talk. And he kind of had a zip through the end of it, but he really landed hard on that. You're going to become a server janitor. You're going to be working the dentist office ring in your city, where you're just like making sure that their workstation's up front and the payment processing system in back and the printer are all connected. And he kind of like painted this meager life for, the diehard sysadmin who doesn't want to learn and doesn't want to grow with the changing times. But over the past couple months, I've heard more and more about how consulting companies are coming in and kind of aggressively gobbling up these longer tail or dots along that longer tail of technical implementation. So you think of the vet office or the dentist office or like the pediatrician down the street's office. They're building platforms, with service integration that tie them into the big medical record systems or, tie it into the pet record system or whatnot. And I'm not even sure there's going to be a spot to have anything but somebody on a skateboard in a data center, scooting enormous servers that have, had a hardware failure back and forth between the maintenance stations.
Wow. That's deep. And by the way, we don't have anything against janitors. We love janitors. We appreciate the work that they do, whether it's for the server or whether it's, in our facilities where we work and play and everything like that. So I just want to make that clear.
Yes.
All right. Carry on, Greg.
Well, I mean, you guys are giving me, tonight just some tidbits that I can take back to work tomorrow. So, definitely thank you guys for that. We got one final question before we get out of here that I want to pose to both of you, actually. So this is kind of a hypothetical scenario, but let's say we got a person out there as a systems admin or engineer. So what would you recommend to him or her to prepare them for an environment that has adopted this DevOps culture? Like what are some of the skill sets? What are some of the qualities that you are saying that you would say to a candidate, hey, you need to learn this, or hey, this is some of the tool sets and some of the tools that you guys need to learn?
So I think there's two pieces to that, and it's, like you said, the tool set and the skills, right? And so the skills, I'm going to say a couple squishy things. So one is to think about empathy. Empathy is becoming kind of the key word of this kind of DevOps thing. And what that means is it's this kind of, at its simplest, it's like thinking about what other people have to do with this crap that you do, right? So if I'm a developer that's used to being able to throw things over the wall and I want to work in this more DevOpsy way, so the skill I want to develop, which is hard to develop, is to be empathetic. The techniques or the tools to learn is to learn a little bit about what does an operations person do. And that fundamentally, at the end of the day, if you want to learn how to be empathetic, is talk to somebody in a different discipline and ask them what they do in a day. You know, go to your sysadmin, and hopefully not when there's 10 fires going on, and so good luck if you can find that time, and just be like, tell me about what's the craziest thing that happened to you today, right? You know, give me, and because sysadmins, we love to tell war stories, right? And likewise, I used to tell my sysadmins, I'd say, like, listen to what the developers are saying next row over, just listen to them. Sometimes it's to be defensive, because be like, you want to do what with the what now? You know, but also to understand what they're doing. So I would say think about, I'm not going to say think outside the box, because that's super cliche, but look at it as just a part of the discipline. Like if you're a sysadmin, go to like codeschool.com or whatever and take like the super basic Ruby class. Even if you're never going to write a line of Ruby in your life, just write some darn code, just so you can feel what it's like to do that. If you're a developer, like go fire up a free tier Amazon Amy, Amazon Linux, and like figure out some super basics. Just what does it mean to have a machine work? Because then you're going to talk more empathetically and understandably to your peers in a cross-functional team. What do you think, Michael?
I completely agree with the empathy thing. I just went back and found that tweet from earlier, the empathy tweet, and it summarizes is it's not a core skill like a core dev skill, and it is a core dev skill, and it doesn't mean being nice. It means like kind of imagining what it's like to be that person who doesn't know how this shit works. So, I'm not a sysadmin and I don't know how the Linux kernel works, but it's awesome when something goes wrong and one of our system administrators explains to me what went wrong. And I know how computers work, more generally speaking, and I can follow everything they say. And it's so incredibly helpful. I then really actually understand what happened instead of just kind of being told that it's fixed. But to prepare yourself and kind of catch the wave, so to speak, there's an enormous amount of material that has kind of come out of the DevOps Days series of conferences. And I've really found those to be some of the rawest, purest, and greatest source of information. And just peruse some of the past and current conferences on the DevOpsDays.org website and find something that's interesting to you, because there's so many different flavors of contribution that someone can make in this DevOps culture. Maybe automation's not your thing and you're a monitoring love person. You love to have that visibility into your production infrastructure or your QA infrastructure. Or maybe monitoring or automation's not really your thing, but you love this idea of cap theorem and how you could design a system, that meets these kind of seemingly three impossible constraints, and you just want to learn a little bit more about how that happens. There's going to be something in there that tickles your interest. And kind of follow that rabbit hole, really kind of learn something that's going to ignite that passion that probably isn't there if you're kind of looking for a new gig.
I would just piggyback on the concept of watching and consuming content from like DevOps Days, but also try to attend one if you can, because they tend to be built around also, besides just talks, they tend to be built around open spaces. So these are going to be like very free-form conversations. And what I would say is that if you do that, attend an open space about a thing that maybe isn't your normal job. And I encourage, if it's a challenge for you to get to one. So another fellow podcast, the Ship Show, they have a diversity program. So if you're in an underrepresented group, they sponsor people going to conferences. So if you go to theshipshow.com/diversity, it's a really great program. I highly recommend it. And even so, DevOps Days tend to be relatively inexpensive, and they're cropping up all over the place. So
yeah. So I definitely agree with what you two are saying there. I want to put out there as well, and there's been some discussions on our forums about DevOps, mainly started by me, but there is an ebook out there called Shades of DevOps. It's a pretty good book by Joe Sanchez. You can get it if you go to devopsebook.com and then /shades -of-DevOps. There's an ebook there. And there's a What is DevOps Infrastructure as Code by Mike, I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, Lukides, I think it's how, Lukides. As well, there's a PDF out there. This gives you some more insight into, what DevOps is and some of the tooling and some of the cultural aspects around DevOps as well. So I'll definitely check out your podcast as well. And give us the URL before we all get out of here. Give us the URL.
Yeah, so we're at arresteddevops.com. Also, if you're a podcast person and you dig DevOps, I recommend there's also theshipshow.com. They tend to be around DevOps and release engineering. And DevOps Cafe is kind of, they're the godfathers of DevOps podcasting, and they talk some deep stuff. So you might come listen to us first to kind of understand the basics, and then go listen to Damon and John when you've kind of leveled up and are ready for them. So.
Excellent. And how can people get in contact with you if they want to follow you on Twitter or?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Matt Stratton. So I'm pretty much, I live there. So that's about the best way to get a hold of me. I love to engage on Twitter. So questions you have about DevOps, infrastructure as code, Jeff, I don't know, stuff.
Yeah. That's pretty open on Twitter. I'm a little less active, but I'm Lanyon M at Lanyon M on Twitter, and I would love to meet people. So Matt and I are both co-organizers of DevOps Days Chicago. We've been kind of dropping the DevOps Days hints and how much we really enjoy the whole series of DevOps Days conferences, and so we'll both be there. And if you can make it out to Chicago, there's promo codes and whatnot floating around on the internet. And we would love to meet you and talk with you. Those open spaces are such a conducive, warm, inviting environment to, kind of probe and ask questions. The people you never thought you'd ever get to meet in person or sit down and end up having a 3 or 4 hour conversation with are the people you will end up sitting down and having a 3 or 4 hour conversation with at a DevOps Days.
That happened to Michael in Minneapolis. He pretty much spent the entire conference talking to Patrick DeBaugh. It was pretty cool.
Do you guys have any plans on bringing like a DevOps Days closer to my part of the world, closer to Cincinnati?
Well, so the thing that's interesting is they try, so the DevOps Days Chicago, this is the very first one that's been in Chicago. And Minneapolis, that was a few months ago, was the first one in all of the Midwest. So
wow.
They're growing. They're pretty careful about wanting to not kind of cannibalize upon each other. So I mean, there's even concern that Chicago might be too close to Minneapolis. But I know, and my geography is terrible. So I don't know, like how close like Pittsburgh is to you guys, or I know there's been talk of like Philly. It might be interesting to do. I mean, some type of Ohio, and so it can happen. And the upshot is if someone wants. There's not like really like official governing body of DevOps Days. I mean, it's a group of organizers, but the way one gets started is it's a local group of people that say, I want to have a DevOps Day in Cincinnati. And you go to devopsdays.org and you read the organizer guide and you look at all the stuff there is to do and you go home and you cry when you think about all the work it would take and then you shake it off and you try it out, so. Yeah,
you got to talk to Matt and I in 4 weeks when it's the day after the conference, and we will try and get you never ever to think about running a conference.
That's funny. Yeah, at Pittsburgh, I mean, it's probably the same distance as it is to Chicago from Cincinnati, which is around 5 or 6 hours. The only thing about the one in Chicago I would love to attend, but it's so close to, coming off, like I'm going to be attending a couple of conferences in the next couple of weeks, and it's just a lot going on. Are either one of you going to be at PuppetConf?
I will not. I will be, but my ticket is bumping right up against the Chef Community Summit. That's actually the week right before DevOps Day Chicago. So the week before our conference, I'm going to be in Seattle. So yeah, it's going to be nuts. But you should definitely, my buddy Christopher Weber, who now works at Chef, but big guy in the Puppet community, is speaking at PuppetConf. So he loves to talk about DevOps, man. So hunt him down and say hi.
I definitely will. Are you still there?
Yo.
Okay.
Great podcast. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much for joining. I love the energy you guys have. I'm gonna have to check out your podcast too. I'm definitely gonna refer it. That empathy stuff and those tips in terms of how to get engaged and how to get inside of other people's heads, and man, that's golden. That's golden.
What it's all about. It's that easy.
So one more show I want to shout out, and it's one that I frequent quite often, and that's Hangouts. I don't know if you guys ever checked out the Hangouts, Google Hangouts. Mm-hmm. So that's another good one. If you go on YouTube and just type in Hangouts, and you'll see their YouTube channel there, and subscribe to it, and they do videos pretty frequently. So check those guys out. A lot of good stuff being talked about in that Hangout as well. So, guys, I want to definitely go ahead.
I was going to say it's kind of like open space on the internet. So,
yeah. Excellent. So I definitely want to thank both of you for taking your time out of your evening. I know you guys are kind of busy with organizing DevOps Day Chicago, so I want to thank both of you for coming and appearing on our show tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was super fun. Excellent. I had a great time.
Yeah, this was my first time being on a podcast, and I've had a blast.
Thank you. If you guys ever want to talk about DevOps again, you guys are more than welcome. We'll get together and we'll arrange another podcast and take it from there. So thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Have a great end of the week.
All right, you too. Take care. Take care, Yuri.
Blacks in Technology.
Blacks in Technology. Blacks in Technology. Blacks in Technology. Blacks in Technology. Blacks in Technology.